Hey everybody, welcome to Horror Reanimated. My name is Brian J. This week we're going to do something interesting. It's been a while since I did a review of an unmade script. And this week we're going to do an early version of Beetlejuice. It is the second draft by Malcolm McDowell, the late Malcolm McDowell, based on a story by Michael McDowell and Larry Wilson. It's dated June 1st, 1985. So, before we get started, you can follow the show on Facebook at facebook.com/horrorreanimated. You can follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at bshowbrianj. At bshowbrian. And if you have any ideas for the show, any early drafts of scripts, any alternate ideas, fan theories, or any comments that you have at all, please, you can email me, bshowbrian@gmail.com. So, with all that out of the way, and also, wherever you listen to the podcast, please be sure to rate us, and even subscribe if you can. It just helps us out with the algorithms and getting picked up. And you can also go to YouTube, Horror History, Brian J's Horror History on YouTube, where I do a lot of stuff there that's pretty self-explanatory. Now, I'm not gonna dick with all that stuff for very long. I want to get into this because this is probably going to take a little while. I usually try to keep the show an hour. I'm going to try to do this in an hour. But this, I think, is Horror Reanimated's first review of an unmade script. I did it for John Carpenter's Unmade Halloween 4 for the B Show podcast a few years ago on Halloween. Now, you might be wondering why I'm doing Beetlejuice. It's not an anniversary or anything like that, but the draft that I read starts on the 4th of July. And I figure with the 4th of July this weekend, what better time to discuss a film that is essentially a skewering of Americana, the throwaway, trash everything, and instead of making it last, just go buy a new one, the consumerism of America. And the struggle of small town living and values versus the fast city life of the New York yuppie. I figured what better time to do that than 4th of July. So that's what we're doing today. Now, this is going to be something new for me. I didn't do it last time. I made some notes. I'm going to give my commentary. I'm going to pretty much explain to you guys. I'm going to start at the beginning. Lay things out. I'm going to describe what's going on. And if it's the same as the movie, I'm going to say that. I'm going to point out any differences. But it really is, the first half of the movie, there's a lot of similarities. It's the last, probably the second half of the last act. Things really depart from what we actually saw on screen. And you're going to notice quite a few differences. And I'll be talking about what's going on. I'll be commenting on some things, sharing some notes, and also reading portions of the script. So, this draft, like I said, has many differences, but we'll get into that. So, without any further ado, written by the late Malcolm McDowell. Malcolm was named by Stephen King as one of the premier novelists, fiction writers of the day, which is a pretty big thing. Had some screen credits to his name, some novels, but his biggest claim to fame was being the screenwriter for Beetlejuice. So it's interesting to note toward the end of the film, especially as Otho is mentioned. As Otho's character arc kind of plays out in the end of the film. It's a little bit different than in the film as opposed to in the screenplay, and I'm going to have some commentary on that. But let's just get rolling. So as I mentioned, Beetlejuice second draft by Michael McDowell, based on a story by Michael McDowell, Larry Wilson, June 1st, 1985. Much of the beginning is really the same, except for a few small details, to be honest. You have the flyover of the empty town to reveal the model. Pretty much the same as with the finished movie. There are some things in there that tie into some details later in the film. Some things that we saw in the finished film, but they're kind of described more in detail or fleshed out a little bit more in regards to the house and the nature of Adam and Barbara's existence post-mortem. So we'll get into that, though. But, the script mentions 60s decor in the house, mentions that their style is pretty much stuck in the 60s. Huge, silly appliances, impossibly huge. And in the script, they actually own an appliance store, not a hardware store. So we kind of get the idea, and they mention it looks like, 4 generations of the same family have lived in this house. So right from the get, they really sell the idea of, and I know it's shown in the movie, Adam and Barbara are country people with simple means and simple lifestyle, but it's really hammered home here, and it's really going to make sense because the New York yuppie lifestyle, the drastic clashing of styles, is much more evident in this. It's much more face value, I guess, more shallow, not as deep in the film. It's there, and it's a hey, we don't want them living here because they're different. And there's some commercialization that happens between Lydia and Charles Dietz in the film, but it's really ingrained, especially as other guests start arriving. And again, we'll get to that. But instead of, and this is interesting, instead of dusting Barbara's baking an American flag cake, as I mentioned, it starts on the 4th of July. Barbara's baking an American flag cake for the Winter River 4th of July picnic, which I guess she does this every year. And they also mention that every year she screws the cake up. Did you put all the stars on? Did you put enough stripes? All this stuff. So, just a funny aside. And as we're talking about Americana, it's really hammered home here. Adam has an orchard. He still has the model. Like I said, much of the beginning is the same, except Adam has an orchard of pears and apples. In fact, he feeds a deer out of his hand and interacts with the paperboy and his pet collie in the very beginning. Very humble roots, very salt of the earth. They're very earthy people. You get the idea that they're pet friendly. They say several times animal friendly. Adam would kill you if you hurt an animal or something like that. So, really selling that aspect of these people and their personalities. So, but there's another difference where Adam actually feeds a deer out of his hand and this will play in again. I got to remember to let myself play this out because I tend to jump ahead as I read, forgetting that there's more to come for God's sake. But he's in his orchard, he's feeding the deer, and then he interacts with a paperboy and the paperboy's pet collie. And as I've made some notes, you've got the paperboy, you've got apples, you've got a collie, you've got an American flag cake, you've got the 4th of July. The very opening minutes of this screenplay is selling that this is America. This is middle America, apple pie, good old wholesome people in the country. Small town, slow, humble people. So Adam and Barbara, and Barbara's cousin Jane is a real estate agent. She comes to this, again, the house. If I don't mention it, it's pretty much the same. That'll go without saying. So if I forget to mention that, it's pretty much the same. She does come and she makes an offer, talks about people wanting to sell the house for $500,000 and all that stuff, or wanting to buy the house. But Adam and Barbara leave. Instead of going to the hardware store, they go for the 4th of July picnic. So they pack up the cake, they start going. Adam reveals in a twist of irony that she actually got the cake right this year, and as we know, they're going to die. So, again, that's one of the funny things here. So there's a lot of little dramatic irony that's woven in subtleties that make for a pretty funny script. But one of the things is that this is the year, go figure, that Barbara gets the cake right, and then they're going to end up dying. So they leave for the 4th of July picnic, not the hardware store. The collie that we saw that belongs to the paperboy runs out in front of the car as they go down a hill toward the bridge. And just like in the film. So they screech to a halt, and a van of hunters that is described as having a deer strapped across the hood of the car, a dead deer, which earlier in the film, as Adam was in the orchard, kind of pissed him off when he saw it go by the first time, and some foreshadowing. They screech to a halt, Adam and Barbara, as the van of hunters rear ends them through the side of the bridge. So, and again, there's a lot more in the film. There's a lot of stuff in the film where when they did rewrites, they made it more subtle. or they took certain elements out. And it really helped, I guess, the flow of the story. But there was much more of a message, or the political or social commentary, I should say, was much more sharp in the screenplay. And it was dulled a little bit in favor of the comedy and gags and the lighter tone, I should say, of the Michael Keaton Beetlejuice. So the hunters actually pushed them through the side of the bridge. And in this film, a piling has broken and crushed Barbara's upper arm. So this also explains, remember later in, the finished film, I don't know, I'm jumping back and forth here. In the finished film, when Adam and Barbara walk in to the house, Adam says, "How's your arm?" And she said, "I don't know, it feels frozen." This is why, because in the script, a piling had broken from the bridge and crushed Barbara's upper arm. So just like the film, the car teeters over and into the water. The van, as I mentioned, the social commentary is a lot sharper in this film. The van of hunters that actually is revealed to have an "I Love New York" or "I Heart New York" bumper sticker. The van of hunters peels away from the scene, not after it's already fallen into the water, but as it's fallen. And they could get out and try to help them, but it's actually before it starts sinking, I should say. So it teeters over, falls into the water, and as the car is sinking, you can actually hear the screams of Adam and Barbara until they're muffled by the water filling the cab of the car. So again, the finished film was made a lot more lighthearted, even though it is a dark comedy. And this film was very dark in a manner of speaking, as far as the what happens in the film. It's a little bit more serious, a little bit sharper, a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say sinister, but it's got more of a hard edge to it. It wasn't as lighthearted as what we would see. A lot of the comedy, although it's funny and you get a chuckle as I read a lot of the stuff, it was a lot more subtle. It was almost like if you take the two, if you would say it's a it's a sharp-edged dark comedy with some humor, with some gallows humor, and then the finished film, that's the screenplay. The finished film is actually a black comedy with a little gallows humor and a more dull edge. That's the way I'd explain it. So station wagon sinks, we hear them screaming. Then the transition back to the house, almost exactly the same as in the film, except a clock is slowly ticking, and we'll see more to do with clocks in the film and time as the script goes on. But the only main difference between the transition between the bridge death and the house is the clock slowly ticking, and then it comes to a stop as the fireplace ignites. And Adam and Barbara enter just like the finished film. As Barbara warmed her hands, though, in the film, her fingers ignite like candles. Instead, her entire injured arm falls off into the fire, just detaches from where the injury was. So then Adam retrieves it as they sit there dumbfounded, and then they blow out the lit fingers, as opposed to her just having it catch on fire from holding it too close to the flame. So it actually fell into the fire, and they had to retrieve it and pull it out. And then there's actually a little scene where they're sitting on the couch, and Ellen reattaches her arm. She tests it, and then it's all fine. So, again, much of the same as the finished film. Adam wonders, how they made it back, if they survived the crash, pretty much as it plays out in the film. And then Adam goes to the porch, and in the film, when you go to the porch, everything's dark. It's almost like, it just looks like a darkened soundstage with a harsh white light. Except in the screenplay, Adam goes out on the porch, and you can see the sunset. Except the yard disappears when he steps off the porch. So they can see out into the town. They can see Winter River, they can see the sunset and the scenery and the yard. They can see all that stuff from the porch, much like when they're looking out the windows in the film. Except, as I mentioned, when he steps off the porch, it's a little bit different than what we saw. In the finished film, Adam steps off the front porch and into the sands of Titan, which is one of Saturn's moons. Or, I guess Beetlejuice does mention Saturn. But when Adam ventures out, the script reads like this. Exterior, the great void. Adam is nowhere. There's no ground, no sky, nothing to stand on or hold on to or give boundaries or distance. Just vast nothing. Not white and not colored either. The noise of a clock ticking. As I mentioned, more mention of time, clocks, ticking, all that stuff. Adam looks about in surprise and doesn't like what he doesn't see. He turns right around to head up back to the steps, but there are no steps. Adam calls for Barbara. He runs off a little in the distance and calls again. "Where are you, darling?" quietly. He goes even farther away, and in the foreground, an enormous geared wheel, the size of a man, rolls by, tearing up the unseamed ground. Something pours out of the tear, ooze or stuffing. Adam runs forward and stares after the wheel, which is now out of sight. Two smaller gears, looking very much like components of a giant watch, spin along behind him. One of them veers suddenly towards him, and though Adam jumps out of the way, the gear snags his trouser leg and shreds it. The perfectly enormous gear comes barreling toward him. Adam leaps out of its way. The gear turns, fishtailing, kicking up ooze and stuffing. Adam flings himself suddenly to the right, but trips into the path of the gear. And he's about to be crushed, he's suddenly jerked up to safety. So when Adam goes off the porch the first time, there's no sandworms, there's no Saturn. It's just essentially the gears of time itself. It's a giant void of nothingness with the gears of time, assumably, rolling through to roll over him. So then, when they're on the porch, they're bathed in the glow of the 4th of July fireworks. Again, just like the film, he's been gone 2 hours. So again, a lot of especially in the beginning, a lot of the bedrock of the film is very much the same as the screenplay, with these subtle differences, and some will get more severe as time goes on. But I just thought that was really interesting that instead of Saturn and sandworms, it was literally nothing. He stepped off the porch into nothing and was almost run over by the gears of time. And then as the gears tear up the ground or the lack of ground, it reminds me of when I took an astronomy class and my teacher was trying to explain to me a black hole and how space-time is like a fabric, and it's like trying to understand something three-dimensionally in 4 dimensions. So the idea of Adam running on nothing, he's essentially just, there's no ground, there's no sky, there's no nothing. There's no floor that he can see, he's just running. And at the same time, as the gears pass by, they tear up the nothing and stuffing or ooze comes out. It's just really, it's like he's running through the fabric of space-time itself. It's really fascinating, just how differently that played out. But so again, they're on the front porch. They're bathed in the glow of the 4th of July fireworks. And the sense I got reading that, and it wasn't stated in the screenplay, but the sense I got reading that was they're dead, they're missing, they were bringing the cake. And the cake was going to be the prize of like a big, like a lottery drawing. What's it, a raffle? Is that what it's called? They were raffling off tickets, and the winner was going to get Barbara's cake. And her what's her name? The designer, Jane, had just talked to her. So obviously something is amiss. They should be noticed. These are people, it's a small community, they should be missed. But life goes on when we're gone. And that's what I got from this, is here they are, they're dead. It's been a few hours. It's obviously nighttime, and then he died sometime during the day. And the paperboy was out. So if it was morning, so they've understandably, or I guess you'd be right to assume that they've been gone for a number of hours. It's been all day. The sun's setting, and you've got fireworks going off for the celebration. Everyone's still partying and having a good time. Adam and Barbara are dead. So everything else is the same. Then the scene where they discover the handbook for recently deceased and their lack of reflections with the horse in the mirror, that's pretty much the same. Except the handbook, instead of being compared to stereo instructions, it's often compared to the IRS tax code. It's a big bureaucratic binder with tabs, and it's ugly, and it's something that an IRS agent would thumb through, as opposed to a biblical-looking tome, as you see in the movie, that's just hard to understand. So That's one thing that's interesting. Any IRS thing will foreshadow something else in the future, the screenplay. And as Adam reads from the book, there's the scene where they're laying in bed or they're in the bedroom and Adam's reading through it. Barbara crosses through the mirror in their closet. So she's standing in their closet and there's a mirror on the door and she walks through it and she enters the great void. And I'm going to read a section from the script there. I'm going to leave some dialogue out, but basically Barbara is standing inside the open closet door. As Adam talks, she glances at her non-reflection in the mirror. She touches the surface of the mirror and her eyes go wide as her hand penetrates the surface. Now Adam starts, the temporal perimeters vary for manifestation stuff. But he looks up at Barbara and she's nowhere to be seen in the room. Adam starts calling for Barbara. The closet door swings open slowly so that the full-length mirror inside the door is directly facing Adam in bed. But it's not Adam who's reflected, holding the handbook on top of the covers. It's Barbara. Adam asks, "How did you get in there?" Barbara, "I walked through. It's easy." Adam, "What's it like?" Interior bedroom, in mirror, night. The bedroom is reversed, but there are other things different too. The room just fades out on the edges, and beyond it is the great void that Adam was in earlier. Barbara begins to feel frightened. She peers at her side of the mirror and sees Adam in bed on the other side. The image is dark and fading as if the door between the two worlds were closing off. The mirror grows darker. On all sides of her, the walls of the room fade away entirely. The room tilts and the furniture slides away into the void. At the last possible moment, Barbara bolts through the mirror back into the real world. Adam says, the handbook discourages that sort of experimentation, transdimensional instabilities, whatever that means. So, again, it's interesting to note that not only walking off the porch will send you into the void out front, but also you can enter mirrors as the ghost. And I've always been fascinated with mirrors. I always, for some reason, I don't know if I saw it in a Twilight Zone movie or something, but as a kid, I was always convinced that if I was going to see a ghost, that mirrors were like some weird, portal into the spirit world, and I was going to see him in there. So it's really interesting where that came from. And I know Michael McDowell, who wrote it, was a collector of, different macabre death items. He was very interested in death. So I don't know if it was some sort of spiritual belief from some other culture that mirrors would hold some sort of significance. But it was really interesting that if she enters the mirror, everything starts to fade away. And it's almost like a different world. She goes into the mirror and the furniture slides off into the void as the void slowly engulfs the room. They don't do anything else with that for the rest of the screenplay, which would have been interesting to see that followed up on. In fact, I think later on, if they were going to fight Beetlejuice or try to get rid of him, that might be an interesting way to get rid of him. Drag him through a mirror and then leave him there as the void overtakes the room. So there's a funny scene in Jane's real estate office where she's talking on the phone after this the next day to a prospective buyer for the Maitland estate, and she's setting pictures in the front window and gets stuck, and there's kids out front kind of staring at her as she's trying to talk on the phone and get herself unstuck from the big window display. So then the following scene of Adam and Barbara hanging in the attic is pretty similar to the film version, though Barbara and Adam are somewhat enjoying how freeing being dead is, except for not being able to leave. So in the film, Adam mentions maybe this is heaven, and Barbara says, well, maybe there wouldn't be dust all over everything. But both of them seem pretty free, like they don't have any obligations. They can do whatever they want. They don't have to worry about time and keep track of it. They just spend the rest of eternity, or however long, and we'll find out later, however long eternity is for them, with each other in the house. And I think that's the significance. They're starting to really enjoy being alone, like stuck alone together. The only downside is they can't leave the house. And just as they start enjoying it is kind of when people start to show up. So Barbara and Adam, I mentioned they're enjoying not being able to leave. And they mention the only help they've received from the manual is to stay away from shellfish. I don't know if that's like a biblical tie-in or something, but it was just an interesting note, especially considering that in the finished film, it's not in this, but in the finished film, Adam and Barbara used the shrimp cocktail to try to scare off the party guests of the Dietz family. So in the movie, in the attic, they're dancing to, or at least Adam is listening to calypso music, Harry Belafonte. In this, they're dancing to Artie Shaw, who apparently was a clarinetist. And I want to try to find some Artie Shaw. Had an Epoch Times ad, those guys. So this is Artie Shaw. He's a clarinetist. So it really is a very more mellow 40s, 50s style sound, contemporary American music as opposed to calypso. And it is a little idyllic if if you're them in that position and you're simple people from a different, kind of stuck in old-fashioned times, and now you're stuck in this house. It's almost like when you watch The Christmas Story and you see people dressed up like they're in the 30s and 40s. All right, that's enough of that. That's enough of that. It's nice for what it is, and I guess it's nice for movies and stuff, but nothing I would listen to on a regular basis. So here's where the Dietz arrive, just like the film, with some exceptions though. Instead of garish decor, Delia's style is more upscale, it's fashionable, yet it's tacky New York trendy. Delia is described in the screenplay as relentlessly New York, relentlessly fashionable, relentlessly thin, a totally self-assured Joan Rivers. It would have been really interesting for Joan Rivers to play, instead of Catherine O'Hara, some stuck-up yuppie New York asshole, for lack of a better word. It would have been really interesting. Staggered by Delia's grand entrance, Barbara looked toward Adam, but he has disappeared. Flustered, Barbara glances around the room, shakes herself experimentally, then with a look of surprise on her face that it works, disappears herself. So we find out here that the ghosts can disappear even though they really can't be seen by anybody, or most people anyway. Charles is very much the same, except for he's a successful novelist instead of just a yuppie businessman. And here's a stark contrast too. In the finished film, if you remember, he's kind of burned out. His business contemporaries don't have much faith in him, and he's just kind of hopeful to buy up these buildings and turn them into this and flip this real estate. But in this, Charles is very excited to be moving to Winter River, and he's hoping and he's confident that the new place will help him crank out more hits, more novels. So at the front door, Lydia is nec plus ultra of whatever's fashionable in 16-year-old Southampton girls. This week, that makes her a death rocker. She has on a black tunic emblazoned with alternating rows of skulls and crucifixes, so wearing a hand grenade bandolier and a necklace made of human finger bones. Let's see, around her neck are a couple of very expensive cameras. So when Lydia enters, she's very much in a way would look like Lydia in the finished film, except she's instead of being a counterculture goth kid, she's really just a trendy hipster, but still around the same age. And this is where the surprise comes in. At the front door, the fourth member of the Dietz family climbs over the moving ramp. This is Kathy Dietz, 9 years old. She's dressed totally Soho, but there's something off about the outfit, as if she's not quite comfortable with the look. She gazes around the living room with obvious pleasure. A real house. It's totally great. I can't believe it. So, there are two Dietz children in the screenplay, the 16-year-old boy-crazy hipster named Lydia, and the sweetie pie 9-year-old Kathy. These were obviously condensed into the finished film's Lydia, and there's a lot of reasons down the road why they did that, especially with the additions that they made to the film, making things more simple. But it really does, this story, allow for some things to develop. As I mentioned, there's a lot more developed in this story that kind of got stunted in the finished film because they went in a different direction. So Otho is the same pretty much in the beginning, except a lot more effeminate. But he describes Otho, again, written by a gay man. I'll let you read the script. If you want a copy, just email me, bshowbrand@gmail.com. I'll send it to you. Otho is described as very effeminate and not a very flattering way. And his story arc, as I mentioned, changes a little bit from the finished film. And we'll talk about that down the road here as we get on. But Kathy's the first to catch a glimpse of Barbara in a mirror as they're moving about the house in the very beginning. So in this film, Kathy's the one who can see them, not necessarily Lydia. And hopefully that doesn't get too confusing as we go on. But I've tried to distinguish the two as we talk about them. So the Maitlands wonder when Jane showed the house and mentions the manual got them stuck in the chimney for 3 days. So that's when it must have happened. So again, a nod to the finished film where they draw a door on the chimney and then they enter. My guess is that there's a lot of these throwaway lines that are done for, irony or comedy or a laugh or a chuckle or to move things along or to explain some things. Deus ex machina, if you will. But this one, I could definitely see them trying to follow directions in the manual and getting it wrong and not really hitting the mark. So they're stuck in the chimney for 3 days, which was funny. So the Dietzes explore the new house as in the film, with the ghost trying in vain to scare the Dietzes. There is an extra attempt. Now, both of them are in there with the severed head and Barb pulling her face off. But there's an extra attempt in the bathroom as rancid water fills the tub. Adam's bloated corpse floats up, rolls out onto the floor. And instead of Otho and Delia noticing, they just look down and scream and talk about the ugly ceramic tile. So again, much of the same, just a couple little added things. Until Barbara runs outside, out the back door. Exterior, the surface of Saturn's moon Titan. Barbara's on Titan with an enormous Saturn looming in the sky. She looks around with wonder and some fear. A sulfur volcano erupts in the distance. A meteor crashes with a lurid explosion. As from a great distance, she hears Adam's voice. So this plays out pretty much as in the film, except she didn't punch the sandworm. They just ran and got into the house, and then it got pissed off because it couldn't get them. So more of the sameness, except in the wallpaper scene where they're steaming the wallpaper. They mention that they're greeted with hot blasts of noisy steam, the Maitlands are, from the guns of the wallpaper removers dressed up in satanic red jumpsuits wearing Walkmans that resemble horns. So it's just kind of interesting. They resemble little devils. Again, little added touches to add to the surrealism of the film. So Adam and Barbara are trying to make it up to the attic, but they're dodging obstacles as they run upstairs. As they make their way down the hallway, they run the gauntlet past every open door outside Lydia's room. Adam and Barbara pause and glance in the open door. They're driven against a wall by a jet stream of hot water. Just outside the door of Charles's study, they've nearly reached their goal to the second flight of stairs to the attic, and a shower of electrical sparks and a loud crackling pour over them from an electrician rewiring Charles's computers. Adam's entire body is briefly outlined in the electrical storm. This quickly subsides, except for a remaining charge on his hand. Barbara tries to beat out this painful electrocution while Adam jumps around in evident pain. When at last the charge dissipates, Adam finds his hand is black and smoking. Adam and Barbara rush up the stairs to the attic and throw themselves through the door into their sole refuge. So now we get the idea that they feel pain in the film. So not only did her arm fall off, as it was injured in the car crash when she came back into the house, but they're able to be moved around or interact with these terrestrial objects, like being sprayed against the wall, like having the electrical sparks, bouncing off of him, actually being electrocuted and his hand turning black. The only thing that I did mention is it looks like, I forgot to mention, is they do heal, it looks like, from these wounds pretty quickly. But it does make me wonder what happens if they're mortally wounded, or let's say they're burned completely to nothing. It's not really explained in the film, but you can infer from something that happens towards the end without giving anything away. So again, more sameness, except Delia's sculptures go in the barn, not in the house. They're not big pieces of plaster. They're welded steel and feathers. So much more industrial than just garish. Much like the film, Kathy sees the faces in the window when she's outside looking around. Interesting here is the idea that the ghosts can be, and I mentioned ghosts being injured, my bad. Again, maybe what happens if they're completely dissolved. Maybe it's in the manual. Again, more questions that aren't really answered in the film. So several mentions to Delia's prescription drug abuse are evident in this film. There's like a few things that are a little uncomfortable. One of them is just the blatant drug use by Delia that's accepted by the rest of the family. Delia says, "Buckle down, Kathy. This is life, and be a perfect darling, and go get mommy some drugs." To which Kathy, the 9-year-old daughter, responds, "Any particular kind?" Not like, "What are drugs?" "Mommy, it's definitely fast times in New York City with the Dietzes." She says, "It doesn't matter. Just remember, though, too many is better than too few, and a glass of Perrier, 1 cube." To her 9-year-old kid. So, obviously, Michael has some disdain for the New York yuppie crowd, and shows their cynicism embellished pretty good here as far as the drug use is concerned. So, while Kathy looks for the ghosts and the drugs, she and Charles enter Lydia's room. Again, I'm not gonna foreshadow here because I did make a note of it later, but as they enter the room, on Lydia's bed is a very muscular moving man. Remember, she's 16, clad only in jockey shorts. Lydia is moving. For those of you who don't know what jockey shorts are, they're underwear. Lydia is moving quickly all around the bed, like taking rapid-fire photographs of him. Charles, "Lydia, moving day is no time to make one more attempt at losing your virginity." "Lydia, I have a concept for a moving calendar." Again, 16-year-old daughter. So it's alarming at how flippant her parents are, not just about their own drug use, but about her sexuality at 16 years old. As I mentioned, McDowell's really selling the yuppie lifestyle versus the country living as a much more drastic shock as opposed to just how they look and how they talk to each other. So when Kathy does use the key to the attic, instead of being deterred, the door flies open on its own as she's leaving. And again, if I forget to specifically mention, it's the same, just imagine the film, and if you're listening to this, you've probably seen the film a million times, so just follow along and know that everything is pretty much the same unless I specify it different. So she finds the model town where Adam and Barb have disappeared to. So they didn't mention it earlier when they disappeared when the family first came in, but it looks like when they make a conscious effort to disappear, it sends them to the model. So Kathy picks them up as they play still as statues, trying to figure out what's going on, looking at the model town. She puts them back, and then she finds the book before leaving. She does not take the book with her. That's one change from the film. So she recognizes Adam and Barbara's faces later in a wedding photo as the statues from the model. And again, a lot of this is really the same with some subtle differences so far. So then there's the scene where the family's eating Chinese food. And a nice subtle touch here is that how tacky they are. They're eating out of takeout boxes, and they have fine china laid out on the table underneath them. They're not even using them. So again, they use chopsticks. Kathy uses a fork, more foreshadowing to her wanting a more traditional American upbringing as opposed to the fast-moving New York Soho lifestyle. So Charles mentions that they're the first to trickle in of people from the city who are going to be headed to the sticks to commercialize and reap the benefits of the town. So they're going to come in and essentially rape and pillage and extract wealth from the town. It's pretty much corporate cannibalization of small town USA. And in the 80s, I know modern people, because I know Beetlejuice is still pretty popular thanks to, used to be ABC Family. What is it? Freeform? The 31 Nights of Halloween. So picture this, all right? Long time ago, there was a lot of stores that were mom and pop stores. You had your local toy stores, your local hardware stores, your local bakery, your local deli, your everything, right? And then in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, these big box stores like your Walmarts, Meijer, I should say, That's a Midwest thing from here in Ohio. We add S's and make everything plural or possessive. So during that time, there was a big move of corporatization where they were coming in and they were cannibalizing small town businesses, and they would either drive them out of business by offering prices they couldn't compete with, or they would buy them up and just shut them down. And again, this to me really spoke to that. It's much like Amazon right now. You see malls going under, you see retail stores going under, while Amazon is reaping the profits and really taking over the retail space, much in the same way. So I guess if someone was to write Beetlejuice now, they could talk about, hey, we're going to, maybe they're a retail developer who's going online and they're going to go and put everyone in this town out of business because they're going to offer free delivery from their new fulfillment center. I don't know. Amazon just put a new one in our town, so it's inevitable. So while this is going on, Adam and Barbara wish for helpful advice from the book for the recently deceased. So this is going so far pretty much in a basic sense, like the film. And at this point in the film, they would draw the door and go get help from Juno. That's when Kathy, Lydia in the film would find the book and the model town and all that stuff. But not in this film. In this film, if I can find my reference point here in this screenplay. Yeah, I did a lot of this on late nights, so I missed some of my reference points. But a gust of wind blows down the chimney as they're asking for help. Turning the pages of the manual, Barbara and Adam shiver with a sudden supernatural cold. Adam looks at the book. Reads, Section 17C, Intercessions and Exorcisms. Barbara, exorcism. That's where they get rid of us, right? Adam, not this kind. This is where we get rid of them. Barbara, what do we have to do? Adam, it won't work. We need a graveyard. Barbara, and we can't leave the house. The moon over the model town comes on suddenly. Adam and Barbara's gaze follows the directed beams of this moon as it shines down into the model graveyard. Adam, the manual says look for a grave-marked swallowtail. So they enter the model, as they have before, because they've learned to do it now. They pass a small, moldering tombstone, askew, half-buried in the ground. The mound before it covered with rotting white roses. On the tomb is carved the name Beetlejuice. So they're looking for someone named Swallowtail. They see a grave marked Beetlejuice. This is the first time we see this. There's no, like in the film, we saw the commercial when they're trying to keep Kathy out of the room. Nothing like that has happened so far. So Beetlejuice has not made any sort of appearance as of yet. So Adam mispronounces it Beetlegooser. On a wind suddenly blowing through the trees, we hear the ominously whispered pronunciation. Beetlejuice. Barbara repeats it. Beetlejuice. Moving on, looking around other parts of the graveyard, Adam and Barbara next come to a large white marbled monument crowned by the angel Gabriel blowing his horn. Carved on the monument is the name Swallowtail. Beneath it is the legend, Hope for the Hopeless. So, just like in the film, they dig. Until they lean down and brush dirt off the face of the coffin. There's a brass plate that reads Swallowtail. So, in this film, the grave is marked, or the coffin is Swallowtail, not Beetlejuice. And then from the script again, they have just risen to their feet when a moldering corpse springs out of the grave and jumps onto Barbara's back and tries to implant a very large kiss on her lips. Adam pulls the corpse off of Barbara's back, and the moldering corpse does a Three Stooges hammer to Adam's head. Adam staggers backwards. The moldering corpse, now between Adam and Barbara, grins insanely at them both, and then flies high off into the air above their heads. They turn to see where he has gone and realize that the moldering corpse is merely a jack-in-the-box marionette on a string and pole apparatus. The pole is held by Beetlejuice. Okay, here's another huge difference in the film. Obviously, the film, we had a charismatic ghoul played by the iconic Michael Keaton. Here is how Beetlejuice is described in the screenplay. He's small and wiry, dark with vaguely Middle Eastern features. Here, and wherever we see him again at the beginning of a scene, his eyes are cold and yellow and shaped like a snake's, but after a moment they melt, becoming human and liquid and brown. This is definitely not a spirit to be trusted. Beetlejuice drops the pole and puppet, takes a long step forward. Never mind him, pick a card. Adam holds up his card. It's the tarot card for death. Barbara holds up her card. It's the tarot card for falling tower. Beetlejuice, destruction. Barbara glances up at the statue of the angel Gabriel. Barbara, are you Swallowtail? Beetlejuice, he's all tied up. I'm his second in command. The name is Beetlejuice. So in this film, he says his own name. Come on, let's talk. He gives an arm to Barbara and Adam, leads them out of the graveyard. So I'm going to talk about Beetlejuice in a second, but I want to add this. As they depart, we see the figure of Swallowtail, exactly like the statue of the angel Gabriel, bound and gagged and out of sight behind his monument. He stares after the retreating figures of Barbara and Adam with pity. He's got a pretty good idea of what's coming. So, Beetlejuice, in the film, they go specifically to meet him in the graveyard. They dig him up, and they had these weird interactions with him, right? So, in the screenplay, as we've seen, Beetlejuice is not the charismatic, almost carnival barker, entertaining showbiz type of character. He's more of, I hate to say a genie, but he's almost like a magician in a way. Pick a card. Later on in the film, you'll see what I mean by that. He ends up wearing like a top hat and tails as opposed the tuxedo, as opposed to Beetlejuice doing the carnival type stuff. So some differences there. A very much, I don't want to say more subdued, but a more cold. He does play practical jokes later in the film, and obviously he's tied up a Swallowtail to try to take advantage of Adam and Barbara instead of in the film where they're directly going for him. But in the screenplay, Barbara and Adam really have no suspicions about Beetlejuice. They take his advice. They start stalking around the house at night in sheets, and it plays out pretty much as it does in the final film. So they meet him. He says some weird stuff, not nearly as crazy, except he does kind of make eyes at Lydia, which again, a 16-year-old. There's a lot of, there's a recurring theme there of that underage stuff. We'll talk about that later, but they're not really suspicious of him. They're trusting, and he kind of sends them on a snipe hunt. So it's not them coming up with the idea of the sheets. They come up with the idea of the sheets. Sorry. In the film, let me rephrase that. Again, it's been a long day. In the film, they come up with the idea of the sheets after talking to Juno. Juno doesn't appear in this film. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But it's Beetlejuice who's suggesting that they go and use the sheets and do these little things. Much like I didn't mention this, but when they were digging, something says to sing while you dig, and they're singing whatever they can think of. And then there's practical jokes with the dummy and all that stuff. So it reminded me of like Beetlejuice is sending them snipe hunting. And if you don't know what snipe hunting is, it's a hazing thing. It's a ritual that a lot of hunters do to their kids when they take them out hunting for the first time. They take them out. They say, here's a bag. You're hunting for snipe. It's a little bird. You have to go out into the woods, close by obviously, but go into the woods and make this sound. And then you make up some bullshit sound. And you laugh because you send the kid out and he walks around with his bag making this bullshit sound. That's snipe hunting. It's out. You're on a wild goose chase, essentially. So, in a twist of irony, when Barb and Adam strike out with the sheets, they're startled by Kathy. So here you have two ghosts, real ghosts, dressed in sheets, trying to scare away the Dietzes, and here they're scared and jump and screech when they are startled by a 9-year-old. So these scenes play out similar to when Lydia meets the Maitlands, except instead of taking off their sheets themselves, they walk away and Kathy steps on them. They slip off, and Adam and Barbara are standing there in their underwear, which again, just there's these little subtle bits of comedy that, they were abandoned somewhat for like the over-the-top style of the finished film. So Lydia does come out for a flurry of photos just like the film, but the rest of the interactions with Adam and Barbara are pretty much with Kathy. Kathy sees them, Kathy hangs with them, Kathy talks to them. Lydia, the next morning, she develops the pictures. She realizes that they have ghosts in the house, but she doesn't interact with them. She kind of tries to use them to her advantage, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the next morning, Lydia, developing the print, shows Delia like in the movie, and Delia's more concerned with her ruined sheets, and she's pretty unbelieving, and even Charles thinks that she's photoshopped them. So, though Kathy knows about the ghosts, she doesn't let on, because Kathy and Lydia are talking to Delia. Kathy doesn't really let on. She just sort of acknowledges that the ghosts in the photos look convincing, but then Delia and Charles really start laying into Lydia about the sheets, and then she comes clean and says that she's seen them, or that they're real. So, they show that Kathy's really just a sweet, innocent kid, and in fact, she says, she always tells the truth, even when it gets her into trouble. So she's just a sweet little innocent 9-year-old kid that wants to fit in and doesn't like the Soho life, and she latches onto Adam and Barbara. And I don't think it's as evident in the screenplay as it ended up being in the finished film, but they're really the one thing they've been missing out on. It's more of a realization as opposed to just a really obvious statement in the film. They come to the realization that what they've been missing is a child. And they start kind of hanging out with her, and she becomes their surrogate kid like Lydia would in the finished film. So Kathy gives the Maitlands an update, and a suntanning Beetlejuice in a tiny Speedo recommends, after she leaves, that they try to scare them again at Delia's upcoming dinner party tonight. Again, a lot of the same stuff. Instead of Lydia giving the update, Kathy gives the update, she goes away, and then that's when, he's in the I think he's in the whorehouse? No, he's in the quad sunning himself. And he tells them, again, it's him giving the Maitlands these ideas to try to scare them away, as opposed to them coming up with them on their own. So the dinner party's really similar to the film, but with some notable differences. The only guests are Otho and Evelyn, who's Charles' first wife and Lydia's mom. Evelyn is also Charles' agent. So Otho's, I don't know if it was supposed to be his girlfriend. And again, it was 1988 when this movie came out. The movie was written, the finished screenplay was written in like 86 or 87. The production draft, I think, was dated in 86, a year after this one. So I don't know if of Otho's homosexuality was played down to meet with a more contemporary 1988, 87 audience. It was insinuated, but they also kind of have him going back and forth with that chain-smoking writer for Vanity Fair, whoever it is. I don't remember her name. I don't even know if she even has a name in the finished film. But Delia does not have an agent, and his agent's wife does not show up. Instead, like I said, it's Otho and Evelyn. Evelyn being Charles's agent and ex-wife. So instead of a calypso number and the shrimp cocktail routine, the demonstration goes a little like this. Evelyn breaks off during conversation with a violent scream. Delia stares at her for a moment, then an expression of shock crosses Delia's face as she shrieks as well. The two women try to push back their chairs from the table, but can't. The patterned flowers and vines in the carpet have begun to grow, twisting around their chair and table legs. New shoots and vines appear, unfold, and twist even as we watch. The flowers bud and bloom as in a Disney time-lapse nature film. Everyone looks on with astonishment as more of the carpet sprouts. There's a general retreat from the table. And excuse me if I pause. Sometimes there are typos in this. So even though I've made some pretty good notes and highlighted some stuff in the screenplay, I will get tripped up every once in a while. I fancy myself a decent reader anyway. Everyone looks at astonishment, to retreat from the table. Lydia fetches one of her cameras, never very far away. Lydia, it's the ghosts. I told you they were real. Charles. Then Kathy was telling the truth too, to Otho. She said she had talked to them. Otho. It's wonderful. Incontrovertible proof of the presence of the supernatural element in this house. I was, and I remain, an expert in the field. Delia shoots a look of triumph at Evelyn because she was trying to prove to them that there were ghosts in the house. That's what the conversation was around the dinner table, much like the finished film. So as with the film, Delia and Kathy go fetch the ghost after this display, who won't come down. It kind of plays out. They don't show everyone storming off, I don't believe, from what I read. But Evelyn starts to suspect a ruse. There's no snake scene, so Beetlejuice doesn't appear. Again, he doesn't appear in person just yet. Evelyn starts to suspect that they're pulling something on her. Otho's much less subtle about being supernatural expert, and he realizes, as I mentioned, Kathy can see the ghosts. Then they try a second round of tricks, and it's met with a cynical golf applause or golf clap. So it reminds me of, if you've ever seen Creepshow, when Hal Holbrook's character, the professor, shoots his name Billy. Adrian Barbeau's character shoots her at the dinner party. He imagines him shooting her and killing her, and all these academics just turn and like golf clap as if someone just sunk a putt on the 9th hole. So that's what kind of came off like to me. So, but that's what I'm saying. That's the type of excuse me. That's the type of comedy that is injected into this film. It's, again, much less around the gags and the humor of Beetlejuice. It's very much more rooted in the irony and the cynicism of these two worlds coming together. More so the cynicism of the Dietzes, the New York people. So, as I mentioned, the only appearance that Beetlejuice makes at this point is discussing how things went with the dinner party. He's in the model's whorehouse and says from here on out, and stays there from here on out. So, if you're playing along at home, I mentioned before, there's no Juno, but there's also no waiting room. There's no bureaucracy of the afterlife. That aspect was not added until later drafts. So, again, it's easy to see why a lot of changes were made, but we'll get into that later. And because, like I mentioned, the whole second half of the film, or second 30% of the film, is almost completely different from the film we saw. The last portion of the screenplay is almost completely different from the finished film. And right here is where things really drastically start to turn and go in a little bit different direction. So there's still some things that are similar, but from here on out, it's pretty much a whole different ball game. So the only thing really mentioned about the bureaucracy was the IRS tax code, and they take a different approach to that pretty soon here with the IRS. So next we're in Lydia's high school cafeteria, which we didn't see in the finished film. We just saw her leaving school and waving to her friends at the end. But she sits alone. She's fending off bewildered stares for pretty much all 300 students when a cheerleader finally comes up to her and invites her to try out. Lydia pretty coldly declines. Kathy is then dropped off at the home by a school bus, and it's evident that she fit in right away. As I mentioned, she was settling in and enjoying her surroundings in the beginning, but now she's making friends and kids are waving to her from outside the bus. She seems just, fitting in like a hand in a glove. So the issue and the really sad thing here, and it really makes the end of the film a lot more memorable or a lot more emotional, is when she comes home, her parents are really preoccupied, and they don't necessarily ignore her, but they're really cold to her and dismissive. And even when Charles shows some affection, he's really, really, he's more reveling in his success than showing her affection. So, Kathy says, "Hi, Mom." Delia says, "I'm 4 minutes off." Delia's in the corner of the living room. Here's another change, and it works into the theme of time. Delia's in the corner of the living room working on her water clock. It's a tall, enormous, narrow sculpture reaching floor to ceiling and then stretching up through a hole carved through to the next floor. It's a mess of small buckets, dishes, drains, pipes, levers, and counterweights with running water, keeping the whole thing in tremulous motion. It somehow also manages to keep the time on a little dial that's set on kind of an eye stalk protruding into the room. Sounds kind of creepy. I forgot about that detail when I was making my notes. You guys don't understand. This is actually going through an entire script, making notes, highlighting. I started this project probably 3 months ago and couldn't finish it because I was studying for some licensing exams, and then I had to come back to that. So I'm even going to surprise myself when I read some of the stuff that I highlighted because I've forgotten about it. But the eye on a stalk reminds me of the garbage creature from Star Wars. So back to the scene. Delia's making fine-tuning adjustments. Kathy says, "I'm going upstairs to do homework, Mom." Delia says, "I know where you're going. You're going up to the attic." So again, she's going up and spending more time with the ghosts. Delia says, "They know about the 30th. Kathy says, "I told them." I thought it was 31st. I thought I mentioned 31st later on in the script, which we'll figure out. But Delia mentions that they're having a housewarming party, that they're having people come in from New York. All of their network is coming, and they want the ghost to appear and really do some special stuff. Then when she passes into the hallway, Charles reaches out, grabs Kathy, gives her a big hug, picks her up. And you almost get this little tease of like, oh man, maybe he's at least going to be sweet to her. And then he sets her down because the phone's ringing and he's bragging to her about this new book deal that he's got. So it's really sad because she's an afterthought. She doesn't fit in with them. She doesn't fit in New York. She starts fitting in here, and her own parents seem to not really give a shit about her. They're so preoccupied. They're workaholics. And Lydia, let's be honest, or not Lydia, Delia is a bitch. And very distant and cold as a mother. And it's really, when I was reading this, I got a chance to read it and slow down and really absorb it. And it was really sad because you have this 9-year-old kid, sweet as pie. And I've known some people in my life, some friends of mine who were similar, just really cheery disposition, chipper kids, but their parents were assholes. And in some ways it can ruin a kid. So here's Kathy, and she's at least getting this outlet with Adam and Barbara. So, but again, we get the notion that the Dietzes are throwing a housewarming party. My notes said the 31st. The screenplay says the 30th. So they're expecting the Maitlands. Not only are the yuppies invading Adam and Barbara's house, but now they're taking over Winter River. So Kathy mentions them, and there's a little bit of a scene where they talk about all the goings on in the city where, Charles mentioned they're the first trickle in. Well, now they're going to have a big housewarming party where they can show everyone this great new city that everyone can now exploit. It's much more than just, hey, there's yuppies in our house, and maybe they'll open some businesses and do that. It's not just that. It's, hey, we're going to bring all of our friends and our network into the town, and we're all going to take it over and bring our businesses there. So Kathy leaves. Adam and Barbara discuss going through with what they have planned, which, similar to the finished film, they have the second dinner party with Maxie Dean and his wife. This time it's this big housewarming party, this huge shindig. And Adam and Barbara are planning on sicking Beetlejuice on them because he has agreed to kind of take things over since they were having trouble up till now. And as I mentioned, here's my notes again. Here's an exchange between Adam, Barbara, and Kathy talking about what's going on in the town. So Kathy's mom, a friend of Kathy's mom, bought the appliance store and turned it into a gelato stand. Adam calls it Jell-O. Kathy corrects him and says it tastes like ice cream, but it's 3 times as expensive. Beverly says she's filling a need and will make a fortune. And again, filling what need? No one even knows what gelato is in Winter River. So again, it's more of this corporate takeover of the small town America. She's moved here with Beverly's ex-husband and his Chinese boyfriend. They're moving up next month. They bought the old Baptist church. They're going to set up an academy of aerobic self-defense. Adam mentions defense against what? Kathy says muggers. And Barbara retorts, nobody was ever mugged in Winter River. Kathy says Beverly was, but Mommy says she has a victim complex. Again, just that's most of the comedy in this film is very cynical. I just wanted to mention that. And they start selling this and establishing the changes that are going on in this town and the city people who are invading, much like the Dietzes who've invaded Adam and Barbara's house. So Beetlejuice shows up on a moped driving through the model, and he says, real cute kid, huh? Drags down the length of the street and says, I'm going to use my imagination. So remember, Kathy's 9. She's a 4th grader. And this is when, in the film, Barbara picks up Beetlejuice and he pokes her in the finger and she drops him. But she tells him to stay away. And let's see. She releases the evil spirit as he plummets. Beetlejuice parachutes to the soft landing in the town common. Beetlejuice says, watch it, I can work against you too. Now, this is the first time he's outwardly been nasty or vindictive toward Adam and Barbara. And instead of taking this warning, they just they see that these weird things are going on. He says, I can work against you too, but they're still trying to work with him to get rid of the Dietzes. He's kind of an unlikely ally, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, essentially. So Beetlejuice lightens up and says, don't worry about that little girl. I'm more interested in her sister. Still 16 years old. She's still 16 years old. So he's interested in Lydia, but he's also eyeing up her 9-year-old sister. And I didn't think about this before because it's evident in the film, as Lydia is suggested to be 16. This doesn't make Barbara and Adam look too good to still be working with him, even though he's eyeing up a 16-year-old, and in this case, a 9-year-old. Yet Adam and Barbara are still going to be working with him. If this is 2020, they'd be canceled for sure. But from here, there's a scene where Evelyn is back in New York with Lydia. She's staying with her mother. And she lets her go, and Delia apparently too, lets her go to a concert and stay out all night. And she issues this warning. Evelyn says, "All right, you can go if you promise to take taxis and not use any drugs that you didn't bring from home." Now look, I live in Ohio, so I've been around some really white trash people who do the whole, if my kids are going to drink, I'd rather them drink here because I'm providing it and they're home safe with me. I've heard a lot of that in my day. In fact, we used to take advantage of that quite a lot at my buddy Nick's dad's house, and that became our normal place to hang out. And it's just, it's more selling of the rotten, corrupt, bankrupt morals of these yuppie, hipster, village people from New York. Not the village people, but people from the village. So, though it's no place for a kid, the club sounds pretty damn cool. Exterior Rapture Night. Rapture is the newest and trendiest New York club located in a deconsecrated church. I'm a Catholic schoolboy. I know what deconsecrated means. 400 death rockers are milling around on the sidewalk waiting for entrance. Over the door is a banner reading, "Tonight only, Danny Death." Interior Rapture Night. The interior of Rapture has been decorated as the halls of hell. I get deconsecrated with no problem, but I can't read halls of hell. In the stylish black and red. The crowd is equal to its surroundings. So again, just a cool little place. This is the first time Beetlejuice appears outside of the model. He doesn't appear as himself, but he's Danny Death. He serenades Lydia and pulls her on stage. The cool city girl really starts to show her age, though, as she nervously tries to engage him verbally and just really shows that she's a nervous 16-year-old kid. She invites him to her family's big party on the 30th. Now, I originally made the note that it must be Halloween, which it would really make sense if it was Halloween. Because in the script, they mentioned fall, an idyllic fall day. But if it's the 30th, 30 days has September or November. So it could have been September, since we're thinking July and now into September. I probably would have made it on the 31st, but it's not my story. Unless September 30th holds some sort of significance as well. But we notice Beetlejuice's calling card is snake eyes, as I mentioned, which briefly appear in the persons he imitates. So, let's see. There's a scene after this where Delia goes to a dry cleaner's. She treats the dry cleaning lady like shit, and it's revealed that Beetlejuice is the dry cleaning lady. So remember, as I mentioned, Beetlejuice said, from here on out, I'm going to take care of this instead of Barbara and Adam. Make sure that they want him to do things and they're going to go through with it. Well, now he starts appearing outside of the model. First as Danny Death, now as this old woman who's a dry cleaner. And Delia's rude to her, and he offers to deliver the dresses to the party for her since she wants them rushed and there's not going to be much time in between. So then we go back to New York, and again, another appearance by Beetlejuice. Charles brags to Otho that the tax code is just a game and he always wins, while they're in a steam room at a health club in New York. So Beetlejuice appears as an IRS agent. Remember, I mentioned that the bureaucracy rears its head in a different fashion a little bit later. The IRS agent, he follows Charles out listening to the conversation. So now we're back at home on the day of the party, and Charles gets an IRS audit notification in the mail. As it's Charles and Delia, as there's all this going on. They're preparing for the party. Caterers are there. There's people setting up sushi, and they're expecting all these people to come in from New York. He gets an IRS notice that he's due for an audit. And then, Beetlejuice shows up just as the audit statement is being discussed by Charles and Delia. And Barbara's trying to get Kathy to stay with them instead of going to the party, because she knows what's going to happen. They don't know what Beetlejuice is going to do, but they know Beetlejuice is going to try to get everybody out of the house, and they're starting to kind of get a heads up that maybe it's going to be something they're not super cool with. So they're trying to keep Kathy away from the party so she's not affected or scared or hurt by Beetlejuice. Where Kathy says she really can't and asks them to come to the party, hoping for some companionship and to improve relations between the families. That one right there, that hit me a few different ways. I have a daughter, and we really didn't have any kids on the block until we moved to a new neighborhood when my daughter was like 5. So the fact that Kathy, who's lonely and an outcast in her own family, and all these people that are going to be at the party, is knowing that she's going to want to be around, she's just asking her friends to come to the party so she has someone to hang out with. And on top of that, she's trying to mend fences between the two families so everyone gets along. And it really reminded me of either a husband and wife going through a divorce and the kids just trying to be loved by both and try to bring people together, or a young kid who's trying to mend fences between the divorced couple, right? So, I don't know, I've got a kid. Things hit me a little bit differently than a lot of people. So it just really, again, selling the sweetness, and things start to get deeper and more intense as we go toward the end of the film. So as they're discussing this, a crew begins chainsawing Adam's orchard down and putting up a big tent. Now, I mentioned intensity is starting to ratchet up a little bit, the tension is. And it's always amazing to me how great screenwriters and great novelists can just automatically do that with the pace in which events unfold in a film, the things that are said, the dialogue. Reading it, I just got lost, almost like it was a novel. You just got lost in it, and really, you could feel the tension building as I read. And the IRS agent locks himself in Charles's study as all this is going on. So now, Beetlejuice is messing with Charles. While they're trying to get ready for the party, he's telling him he's auditing him, and he wants like 3 years of his financials and all that stuff. Locks himself in the study. So now during this big party, Charles is freaking out. And I'm going to read. Okay, so as they're chainsawing the woods down, or the orchard down, interior attic day, Adam is lying on the floor, looking out a window. He's weeping at the loss of his orchard. He gets up, looks at Barbara, and says, "I don't care what he does to those people tonight." So again, the intensity is starting to ratchet up. They were trying to keep Kathy away from what's going on. They're starting to almost feel some apprehension about what Beetlejuice was likely going to do. And now shit's on. Barbara's like, Barbara. Adam's like, you know what? Fuck them. Because now they've gone too far. They've invaded the house. They've taken over the town. And now they cut down my orchard. Now they've gone too far. So as Kathy watches the crew throw trees into a wood chipper, a cute little squirrel with snake-like eyes jumps into the last remaining tree and as it's chainsawed to the ground. Kathy takes the injured critter into her room, caring for it. She puts it in a box and returns to the party setup. So now we have Beetlejuice interacting with all 4 members of the family. Charles as the IRS agent, Delia as the old dry cleaning lady, Danny Death for Lydia, where he's actually trying to serenade her and attract her. And now to Kathy is this cute little injured woodland creature. So that's, like, we see things unfold. And again, it's just a storytelling process and building tension, but we see these things unfold. We're starting to see what his plan is going to be. He's messing with them. And now he appears to Kathy, sweet little nine-year-old Kathy. And it's like, oh, God. As you read this, you start feeling for the characters, and that's at the point when things start to pick up. So Otho arrives with a suitcase full of drugs. It's a small suitcase. It's like an attaché case or a shaving kit. But he arrives with a suitcase full of drugs as Beetlejuice, disguised as the old woman from the dry cleaners, carries Delia's clothes to the master bedroom. Interior master bedroom day. Otho has spread out a pharmacopoeia of legal and illegal substances on Delia's dressing table, and allowing her to sort through. Otho, The pink now, the blue in 15 minutes. Let those take effect, and then take a couple of reds with a glass of apple juice. That's what I'd do. So, again, just these people. Like, what's the line, Adam, when he picks up the sculpture? These people. Again, just the debauchery, the drug use, the cynicism. They're just morally bankrupt at this point. And they're so wrapped up in their own stuff, they don't notice what's going on with their kids. Again, a lot of messages that you can read into from this screenplay as things unfold. So, all the drugs. What a party indeed. So, as this is going on, the old woman carries the drugs into the room, and they're trying to keep her from seeing the drugs and all that stuff, and she's just going to leave everything in the bedroom. Delia and Otho leave. Charles, as this is going on, is into his second pitcher of Long Island iced tea, capitulating over his in-progress audit. Beetlejuice's plan is unfolding as Charles drunkenly showers. And there's a funny interaction here with her and Delia. So, as they're trying to shoo the old woman out of the room and not see the drugs, the old woman says, "I hope you don't mind, but I rearranged your closet a little. It was in such a mess." Delia says, "What? Oh, just get out." Old woman leaves the room. Delia opens the closet door. Let's see. Hallway dusk. The old woman stands at the door waiting for a blood-curdling scream. When they come, he smiles, an old lady's eyes smile of satisfaction. Charles runs in for the bathroom and finds Delia ripping through her closet like a woman possessed. Great piles of the ugliest and cheapest and gaudiest polyester blend clothing imaginable have been strewn on the floor. Delia turns to her husband and says savagely, "There is not one article of clothing in this closet that does not bear the label Kmart." She holds up a muumuu. That old woman is going to die. Delia flies out of the bedroom, leaving Charles reaching for the pitcher of New England iced tea. Oh, New England iced tea. Thought it said Long Island. Jesus Christ. So Delia confronts the old woman, says, "Get ready to die." And by George, she does. Boy George, geez, Freudian slip. Beetlejuice, the old woman, her face blanches instantly. Her eyes bulge and roll crazily. Her blackened tongue unrolls from her mouth. Her heart palpitates visibly through her dress. Delia's rage turns to horror. Delia, oh God, don't die. So a minute ago it was, get ready to die. Now it's, oh God, don't die. So, let's see. She says, it'll be all right. I just need my pills. I have to lie down for a few minutes. So the woman collapses onto the bed. Delia says, don't die. Just lie down. We've got plenty of pills. Calls out to Otho. The old woman says, just leave me alone for a little while. Let's see. I think that's pretty much it until the old lady walks out of the room, but instead of the old lady Beetlejuice, it's Danny Death. He runs into Lydia. He's come to her party as he's promised. So, again, he's appeared to all four of the Deeds' children in disguise, or all family in disguise, setting them up like dominoes. So, again, some funny and ironic humor. I think you guys are probably starting to get the tone of the humor in the film. And we're pretty much coming up toward the climax. Only got a little bit of notes left. But the huge party is a mix of writers, artists, critics, Lydia's death rocker friends. They all mix, as they mentioned in the script, very well, considering. Charles keeps floating in the pitcher of Long Island's, or New England's, I guess, while two critics oogle Lydia's friend Trixie. In fact, one of the critics, when looking at her, says, "I've never seen such a pair of tits on a 16-year-old. Trixie gives him a disgusted look, knowing that they're critiquing her, and slouches toward Lydia. So, all these mentions of adults going for kids, it really started to make me uncomfortable. And it seems like Michael McDowell was trying to tell us something. Now, this could really be anything. It could be, again, more in line with just this hipster New York elitist attitude. I mean, for God's sakes, we've seen with Jeffrey Epstein in the past couple of years that, I mean, in wrestling, there were just a lot of shit going on in the entertainment world. This has to do with the arts and entertainment, and they're oogling kids, and Beetlejuice is looking up oogling a 9-year-old and a 16-year-old. So there's just a lot of these mentions here, and just a flippant attitude toward Lydia's sexuality by her parents. And I know parents who are like that. I know someone who's got a very attractive 16 or 17-year-old daughter, and ever since she was 15, she's been trying to push her to be 18 and an adult and dress a certain way and get the wrong kind of attention. And I'm not the type to victim blame and say if something would happen to her that it's her fault because she looks like that. But I also do know that when you put yourself out there and when you want to attract a certain type of attention, you don't just attract it from well-meaning people. So again, I don't know if Michael McDowell was trying to hint at this elitist Hollywood art and Vanity Fair type goings on that it was happening, or that he'd run across it, or maybe something happened in his life that, and in his circles that he'd seen. I don't know. To me, for it to happen that many times, either he really despises that and just wanted to use that and get that across, which I completely respect. If you're trying to vilify these people, you're also vilifying this type of action. All the nasty people are trying to take advantage of children. So I can kind of dig that if you're trying to paint all those people as the scum of the earth. But with the frequency at which these things were done in the film, it just was really, really strange and really left me kind of unnerved. So anyway, on to the end of the film. So Otho goes to his room. He goes to get his coat from the guest pile on his bed. And the old woman, her hands are clenched onto the coat in rigor mortis. And he tries to yank it out of her hands, and she sits up in rigor mortis on the bed. She's dead. She dead. So, clutching his jacket. Then we move to Lydia greeting her late arrivals. I'm sorry, Delia greets her late arrivals wearing her muumuu. So, the finished film took Otho and his fashion sense being the way that Beetlejuice messes with him, and they must have gotten that from this aspect of Delia, because it does make sense with him being the decorator, and again, all that was the same in the early part of the movie. But this is translated to Delia, or I guess this is Delia's bag in the screenplay. But one of them makes an ironic statement, given what we've seen so far, as Delia greets them in the muumuu. The matron says, "I love your house. I try to tell everybody that Connecticut isn't the end of the world." So that's not only a comment about it's out in the middle of nowhere, and these yuppies feel like it's out in the sticks, and it's so, it's difficult to access and traverse. But if you think about that in the context, and again, just an ironic statement about what's going on in the film, there's many of these in the script. When Adam and Barbara went to step off of the house, it was really the end of the world. When Adam and Barbara went outside, either they were on Titan, going through the sand, being chased by the sandworm, or they were in the great void of space-time itself. So it really was the end of the world, and very much the end of existence in this case. So the party goes on. People hook up. Otho and Delia hide the old woman's corpse in a closet. And Delia very coldly decides to wait until morning to call the police or an ambulance, saying, "I'm not having a dead woman carried out of my party. Tomorrow's good enough. For right now, let's just get her in the closet." Otho gives Delia a look as if to say, "Are you sure?" Delia continues, "She wasn't even invited." So again, just more dark humor skewering the New York yuppie crowd. So Adam and Barbara take Kathy upstairs as the party starts to wind down, partly because there's some people that decide, there's a chain-smoking person, I don't remember what her profession is, maybe a critic, but a writer or something. She ends up just matter-of-factly asking some dude to fuck in a closet. So as they hear these noises, Adam and Barbara do the responsible thing and take Kathy upstairs and go and play cards and stuff. Beetlejuice, as the auditor, tells Charles that he's in deep shit and delivers a punch to his gut. And he locks himself back in Charles's study. So Charles heads for a place to throw up, but he's stopped by Evelyn, his ex-wife. She's his agent. And the head of, I think it's Bantam Books or some publishing company, who then Charles, as she's trying to introduce him to Charles, who's hoping to really crush it as an author, living there and being... there's the snort again tonight. He's really motivated, but Charles promptly regurgitates 5 pitchers of New England iced teas onto him. Beetlejuice then appears as Danny Death and pulls Lydia into her room. Now things are really cranking up and the film's almost over. But Delia and Evelyn then argue in the barn as Otho urges Delia to gather the ghosts. Lydia tries to dodge Danny Death's physical advances in her room. Kathy leaves Adam and Barbara to return to the party for the finale as they decide to call things off. They're starting to talk. They say, look, we're going to call this off. We want everyone, much like in the film right before Otho and Charles come up to get the model of the town and present to Maxie Dean, very much in the same vein, they decide to call off everything. But they still haven't told Kathy what's going on. But again, they decide to call it off. Then a chill wind blows through the attic. Then we go down to Lydia's room where she's with Danny Death, and she heard the noise, and Beetlejuice just says, it's just the wind. Lydia says, we have to go downstairs now. It's almost time for the ghosts. And Danny Death, Beetlejuice says, but I have a little friend I want you to meet first. Lydia is shocked. Remember, she's 16, and he's making advances on her. Lydia says, Danny. Beetlejuice, Danny Death, releases Lydia and steps back. He opens his fur coat, smiling. His shirtless buttons pop. Shirtless buttons, Jesus Christ. His shirt buttons pop one by one, and through this opening wiggles a small, very much deformed version of Beetlejuice, or Danny Death himself. Attached at the trunk to Danny's chest, this parasitic monstrosity flops backwards and hangs upside down, leers and grabs for Lydia. Now, obviously, this is allegory for Beetlejuice whipping his dick out. But in this case, again, remember, it's at a 16-year-old girl. He scares her off, and she runs away. We then cut back to Barbara and Adam. They're tied to a park bench. And again, this is in the model. They're wrestling uselessly with their bonds. Now, I'm going to read large portions of this. We're almost done. We're at like an hour 30, but we're almost done with the film, the screenplay. But I'm going to read portions of it just instead of trying to describe what's going on. I'm trying to set the what's going on for you and let it play out. But they're wrestling with a park bench. They know he's going to do something awful. They're saying they wish they'd never dug up the grave. And then all of a sudden, the whores come out of the whorehouse, and they're wearing cloth coats drawn against the wind. They're carrying small cardboard suitcases. So basically, they're trying to get the fuck out of Dodge. They're trying to catch a Greyhound bus. It's so surreal and bizarre. But they come out and they look at Adam and Barbara, and then we cut away back to the tent. Now they'd set up a huge tent, which I believe is what they cut down Adam's orchard for. So the wind starts blowing hard against the tent. Driven some of the guests into the house. The catering service is cleaning up. The party's winding down. Kathy's among the plundered tables with a small plate and asks, what kind of food do squirrels like to eat? Now, obviously, this is where everything bottlenecks. The horrors have released Adam and Barbara. They're explaining that Beetlejuice is a malevolent spirit. He's the worst around. They say he's going to destroy your house and everything and everyone that's in it. That includes Hicksville here, which I believe is in describing the model. So he always does this. He's cute, but he's the most malevolent spirit in the universe. They're dumbfounded that the manual would have sent them to Beetlejuice, Swallowtail. They think that's his name, but I'm sorry, no, Beetlejuice. Yeah, because he said they missed Swallowtail earlier on. And the horrors explain that he always does this, and that he tricks you. You were supposed to get Swallowtail. So then the Greyhound bus pulls up. The whores leave. Adam and Barbara try to figure out a way to fix everything. And Barbara has an idea, looking toward the model house. So things are intensifying. The storm is brewing in the model town and outside Winter River, as Adam and Barbs decide to stay and fight with their plan. So the family realizes they're having a family meeting in the closet that the brash couple was fornicating in a few minutes before. They realize that someone has been screwing with all of them, because there's no way that all of those things happened, and the IRS agent showed up the same day they got the notice, same day of the party, all that stuff. And they blame Adam and Barbara. Delia asks Otho how he is with exorcisms, and rushes to find Kathy before they think she's going to get hurt. So Charles and Delia gather the guests into the living room to get their attention and to get them all to leave, as Adam and Barbara race across the model town towards their house. So, as just mentioned, they think not only, like in the film, they think that it's only hinted at when the snake comes around and Lydia says, leave us alone, stop hurting them. She thinks it's Adam and Barbara, since they've been trying to scare them. Because of everything that's happening, they come right out, Charles and Delia, and say, it's the ghosts, let's get them, let's do the exorcism. Whereas in the film, it was much more of a happenstance type of thing. They figured out that the guests weren't going to perform and they weren't going to come down. They're trying to make them come out of hiding. And Otho, after reading through the book, which Otho never gets his hands on the book until the final act here, and he's had it for a while beforehand. Yeah, I think from the second act in the movie. But it's intentional here. Hey, let's get him the fuck out of the house. We got to protect ourselves. It's more protection as opposed to just flush him out of hiding and we don't know what we're doing. It's very deliberate in the screenplay. So the Dietz's cynicism has really come back to bite them in the end of the film at the climax, because they're trying to get everybody out, and they've been selling their friends that they're going to see ghosts for weeks now. As they've been inviting people to the house, they've been selling it all night. People have been waiting for it. So the Dietz's, they're trying to get everyone out of the house, and the guests just think the Dietz's are fucking with them, and that this is part of the act. So then they hear Kathy scream from her room. Everyone, Delia and Lydia and Charles, they all race up to the room. Both families do, actually, because the invisible, what's her name? The invisible Maitlands also rush through and part the crowd like the Red Sea. And the crowd starts to get the idea that something's rotten in Denmark. So they run up and interior Kathy's room night. Kathy lies on the floor, torn and bloody as if attacked by an animal several times her own size. The wooden box that held the squirrels lies in splinters around her. Delia kneels at Kathy's side, applying first aid. Lydia runs in with more bandages. So again, it was heart-wrenching because you know what's going to happen. And throughout the film, you see that Beetlejuice is starting to get violent and he's starting to really pick up the pace. And then here's sweet little Kathy, and she's, attacked by this woodland creature that ends up it was a squirrel, now it's probably some sort of beast. And now through all these actions, the events of the night, all the hauntings, all the stuff, have brought the Dietzes together as a family. The issue is that they think Adam and Barbara are the culprits. So Otho, he goes to the attic to find the ghosts, finds the book instead. As I mentioned, this is the first time he's picked up the book, as opposed to the film where he's had it since probably the beginning. Let's see, when did they went up and found the model right before the snake in the finished film. So probably toward the end of the second act. Mid to end of the second act, Otho had the book, and now here in the screenplay, he just picks it up now. Kathy tells her family that Beetlejuice is the culprit because Adam and Barbara are there with the family. They're talking to her, and she's telling the family it's not Adam and Barbara. It's not the people that lived here before. There's a guy named Beetlejuice, and he's here, and he's the one who attacked all of us. So they say Adam and Barbara wouldn't hurt me. They love me. And as this is happening in her room, Delia's water clock chimes midnight. So now the show begins. So as the guests start for the door, because nothing has happened and it's midnight and she had promised the ghost by midnight, people start to get anxious and they're fed up and they're leaving. So as they go for the door, the clock stops and Beetlejuice slides down the banister. He's wearing a magician's top hat and a tuxedo with tails, looking like he last worked the Catskills, is what they say. I don't know what the hell that means. He does his pick a card routine. Every one of the cards is death. Let's see. He's closing doors and windows. He says showtime. Obviously, there's the iconic line. So as the storm intensifies outside, her sculptures come to life in the barn and kind of start going after. They don't quite attack just yet, but they start attacking people or forcing them kind of toward the house. Inside, the crowd is watching as Beetlejuice performs a series of cheap magic tricks. He produces a bunch of garishly colored paper flowers, pulls a small singing canary out of his mouth, and then the well-dressed woman from earlier, that I think I mentioned, the matron earlier, she gets kind of pissed and says, "I really have to leave." Beetlejuice smiles. The canary perched on his finger is suddenly transformed into a small flying dragon. It leaps at the matron, knocking her off of her chair, claws at her exposed face until it's kicked off by another guest. The dragon flies back to Beetlejuice, perching atop his hat, and begins to twitter. Beetlejuice says, "You'll leave when I tell you to." Behind Beetlejuice, we see Lydia crouching almost out of sight at the top of the stairs leading to the second floor. Her eyes are wide. After a moment, she retreats. Otho comes back carrying the handbook. He's rolling and running down the stairs from the attic. Lydia comes down the hall. Everyone kind of meets near Kathy's room. And as the family talks about getting out of the house, Delia looks out and she sees that the sculptures have surrounded the house. So they're pretty much fucked. They can't get out. So another funny moment. Sorry, I'm giving it away as I read through. So Kathy is telling the family what's going to happen as they're discussing what's going on. Adam and Barbara, through Kathy, are filling them in. And Kathy says he's going to destroy this house and kill everyone who's in it. Delia says, like hell he is, we're going to fight. We paid cash for this house. So again, just more ironic black comedy. Otho has been looking through the book, and he kind of figures out something that Adam and Barbara are going to have to agree to. And Kathy says they'll help. Just tell them what to do. And at this moment, it's pretty clear that Adam and Barbara are just trying to save the day. It's their fault. They're trying to fix things. They're going to do what has to be done, even if it means bad things for them. So in the living room, the guests are fearful. Some of the women are crying. Beetlejuice is still doing his tricks. He reaches over to a woman who's crying and going crazy. He pulls the world's biggest and ugliest caterpillar out of her ear and drops it into her drink. Beetlejuice mentions no one's having fun at this party. Let's dance. Loud music comes on from the sound system. Beetlejuice says, "I said dance." And now, in the far corner of the room, two guests begin in spasmic, frantic dancing. Continues in a wave across the room until all guests are participating in this physical insanity, crashing off one another, smashing against walls. Some of them fly up into the ceiling and hit their heads, nose diving along the carpets. Beetlejuice has a wicked laugh and cackle, dances among all of them. So we're getting a sense that this, Beetlejuice in the film, he changed Otho's clothes. Yes, he dropped Charles from the second story as the snake, but he's physically he's actually trying to kill people as opposed to just get people to leave the house. In the film, we get the idea that he'll hurt people and have fun, and he doesn't really care. In this film, Beetlejuice is much more sinister and is actually intending to injure and kill and torture people. So, when the families come down the stairs, Beetlejuice says party's over, music stops. The dancers fall down like puppets whose strings have been severed. Beetlejuice says, "Everybody leave." The windows all shoot up in their frames, smashing the frames and glass. The doors of the house fly open with crashes. Outside, every door and window opens. Frantic guests pour out of the house, scattering in all directions in the yard. Chased by Delia's lumbering sculptures, they race toward their cars. It's pandemonium. Inside the house, a deadly silence seems to have overtaken the house. Beetlejuice stands in the middle of the empty living room. Beetlejuice says, "I tell you, you guys sure know how to throw a party." The Dietzes just look at him. "Beetlejuice, come closer, I won't bite." Charles looks at Otho. Otho gives him the go-ahead. Charles cautiously comes closer and puts Kathy in a chair immediately in front of and facing Beetlejuice. Charles says, "You don't have to do this." Kathy says, "I do have to. This house belongs to us. All of us." Charles retreats. Beetlejuice grins. He sprouts an enormous pair of leather wings. His face alters and becomes a truly malicious mirror of his twisted soul. Now, that sounds really cool because in the film, Beetlejuice just kind of stays Beetlejuice. We know he turns into the snake, and in the original production script of that version, it was a snake. It didn't have Beetlejuice's face on it. But as to not, again, the snake, as in keeping some continuity or calling back to this script, it wasn't going to be Beetlejuice's face. They thought people would be confused. They wanted it to be clear. So that's the only thing he really turned into. In this case, he's showing his true form. He's not just some guy. And the thing I do like about it is the writer did a great thing here. He was vague with his description. Other than the leather wings, which sounds kind of creepy, his face alters and becomes a truly malicious mirror of his twisted soul. He doesn't describe it. It's just malicious and twisted, which leaves room for the great effects artists that worked on this film to really go crazy. See, sometimes you read things, and although this version of the film is in many ways inferior to the finished version of the film we got, and it's very easy to see, this is one of those things where you see it in print and you're like, man, I really would have liked to see them realize this on screen. So Beetlejuice says, "Who are you, little girl, and what have you to say to me?" Kathy doesn't answer. Beetlejuice says, "Where are your friends? Hiding out in the attic, I suppose. Don't worry about them. Once I'm done with you, I've got a few surprises in store for our ghosts." So again, not only is Beetlejuice trying to kill everyone in the house, but he's also going to go after the Maitlands. So Kathy starts chanting. Now again, here's the difference between the film and this verbiage is in the film. It's from The Exorcism. It's the verbiage that Otho says, but instead Kathy's saying it. "As sudden thunder pierces night, as magic wonder mad of fright. Rivers asunder, men's delight, our ghost, our corpse, and we rise to be." So Kathy holds out her left hand. Barbara suddenly materializes, holding Kathy's hand. Delia, Charles, Otho, and Lydia's eyes widen to the fullest possible extent. Otho says, "This is it, Delia." Otho pushes Delia forward, and Barbara reaches out her hand. After a tiny moment's hesitation, Delia takes it. She shudders. Kathy, "As flies the lizard, serpent fell, as goblin vizard at the spell. Of pale wizard sinks to hell, the buried dead and slain rise again." Kathy holds out her right hand. Adam materializes, holding it. Charles is already there and grasps Adam's hand. After giving him a quick, appraising glance in the face, immediately Otho and Lydia complete the circle around Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice says, "Clever people, who's been reading the manual? You, fat boy, I could make you rich and thin." Otho quivers a moment with hesitation, then stands up staunchly. "Delia, I'd better be in your will." Again, great one-liners, subtle things, still calling back to just their capitalist nature and the cynicism of them. So Beetlejuice flaps his wings, and a wind begins to blow inside the house. In a clockwise direction, his 7 opponents have to strain to keep the circle together. Outside, the guests have fled. The sculptures lie in ruin. The wind blows even harder in a counterclockwise direction around the house. That's a nice touch. It's clockwise in the house, counterclockwise outside. Again, clockwise in the house. Again, speaking to the clock and the time and all that stuff. Just kind of interesting little details that really, those are the marks of like a great writer, that they just get those little nuanced touches in there. So the wind is even stronger inside the house. The wind is breaking up furniture, spinning around crazily and dangerously, but the circle remains as if the eye of a hurricane. Beetlejuice, in an uncustomary moment of panic, throws himself at the perimeter of the circle, but is hurled back by a bolt of colored electricity. He's burned. "I know more tricks than you. Here, girlie, want to see what your friends really look like?" He grins. Adam and Barbara shudder in pain and at once begin to transform into moldering corpses. Their clothing rots. Their skin discolors and peels. Mold encrusts their features. At the same time, the lightning in the center of the circle continues, and Beetlejuice does a spastic dance trying to avoid the charges. He is burned repeatedly. So, Adam and Barbara being shown in their true form as corpses, is really interesting. And it looks like, again, I mentioned early on when I started this that there were some things, there were some things that were combined or condensed or recycled into the finished film. That's one of them, obviously. But here it's actually used to deter the Dietzes as opposed to just something happening by happenstance. And I don't know, I kind of like that detail better than things just happening as part of the exorcism. So Delia and Charles, finding that they're holding hands with corpses, pull away, repulsed and horrified. Kathy yells, "Don't break the circle." Charles and Delia screw up their courage and maintain their grips on the corpse's hands. The lightning intensifies inside the circle. Outside the circle, the wind is like a hurricane, and the rest of the living room is only a blur. Kathy, growing weak, starts to faint. Corpse Barbara groans, "Now," and says, as she says this, her jaw falls off. Again, a nod to the finished film, something that made the cut. So Kathy finishes, "Today is a thought, a fear is tomorrow, and yesterday is our sin, and our sorrow, and life is death. Dear ghosts, so to die is to live, and like is worthless lie." And like is a worthless lie. I think it's supposed to be life is a worthless lie. Again, there's some typos in here. "Then we weep for ourselves and wish you goodbye." Adam and Barbara's corpses turn a last lingering glance on Kathy. Beetlejuice screams in frustration and pain. One last terrific bolt of colored lightning envelops him and causes his wings to burst into lurid flame. He leaps high into the air, smashing through the ceiling. On the second floor, Beetlejuice howling crashes through the third, then through the ceiling as well. He crashes through the attic floor, then out through the roof. Beetlejuice is a ball of fire at the top of the whirlwind surrounding the house. He explodes like a massive display of fireworks. Nice touch. Calling back to the original beginning of the film. I like bookends with the fireworks over Winter River. Almost instantly, the wind calms down. So the downstairs walls of the house have been completely obliterated, leaving only the frame. There's nothing whatever left of the furnishings. Moonlight shines down through the vertical holes. Beetlejuice blasted through the house. Charles asks if everyone's all right. Capsy has collapsed between two small piles of dust and bones and scraps of cloth. All that is left of Adam and Barbara is the pile. Delia raises a limp Kathy, and after a tense moment, Kathy's eyes struggle open. Otho says, "There are doors man is not meant to open. There are places man is not meant to tread. I guess Connecticut is one." Jesus Christ. I've heard Connecticut's a shitty place, but there's a lot of there's a lot of knocking Connecticut in this movie. Lydia says they give up their lives to save us and the house. Delia reminds them that they were already dead, but they did sacrifice themselves. Kathy says they can't be dead. So she runs for the stairs. Otho stands beneath the holes in the ceiling, looking up at the moon, and says, "We could think about a skylight." So again, still little bits of comic relief here. Kathy obviously goes up to the attic. She looks over the model. Some of it survives. Some was sheared in half or sheared off when Beetlejuice went out the top. Lydia, Charles, and Delia come silently into the room, stand together, looking at the miniature version of their home. Charles says, "We have two choices. We can stay and try to put this house together again or move back to New York." So it fades out. Before I move on, I wanted to mention a few things. It's not expressly stated, but it would appear as if the exorcism wasn't just for Beetlejuice. Now, yes, they sacrificed themselves. They mention that. But in this case, like Otho bringing them, rendering them in physical form, Kathy does the same thing, and they join the circle around Beetlejuice. So not only are the family united in a bond, a circle in the exorcism, but they essentially exorcise Adam and Barbara to get rid of Beetlejuice. And of course, Kathy's heartbroken. I thought this finale, I like this finale much better than the one in the film. I will say this, and I love the movie Beetlejuice. I absolutely love it. I've loved it ever since I was about 3 years old. But the ending of the film to me always seemed a little, not anticlimactic, but it reminded me of Looney Tunes a little bit, like Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd. And the whole sandworm coming through the house never really made sense to me. Because Barbara was on Titan, and there was really only a door to the house whenever they wanted to come back. So how did she traverse the barrier between dimensions, I should say, to crash the sandworm through the house? And if Beetlejuice was dead, why would the sandworm eating him cause him to go to the afterlife? The same afterlife that he was already existing in. So, unless he was technically out, living in the human world, but that doesn't even make sense. So there are a lot of parts of the end of the final film that never really made sense to me. And the only thing that I didn't like about the end of this film is what's about to happen. The little prologue or epilogue, whatever it is, epilogue. After this has happened, they've been exorcised. Beetlejuice has been destroyed, we think, although he's a malevolent spirit who burst into flames. We think he's gone for good. But then again, so are Adam and Barbara. So now they go into the house. Lydia's practicing cheerleading. She's on the front lawn. She still has her skull or her finger bone necklace from the beginning and some of her death rocker makeup, but she's a cheerleader now. So now she's changed and she's fit in with her surroundings, which would still kind of make her a hipster, wouldn't it? Because now she's just adapting to her new surroundings. In the backyard, Charles is tending to the replanted orchard, which is pretty cool. At the same time, he's dictating his fifth in a series of occult novels into a Walkman-like dictaphone. Go back in the living room. It's repaired, being redecorated by someone with much more taste than Otho. But the water clock in an improved and expanded version is still there. Kathy goes upstairs. She takes a glass of iced tea to Delia, who seems like she's nicer to Kathy, and you would think that they were brought together. So hopefully that's it. She does say thank you, dear, and yes, and she's very pleasant to her. Has Kathy take something upstairs. Kathy goes to the attic. The model is being repaired. It's apparent that it's now Kathy's bedroom, so she lives in the attic. Kathy takes a small object that Delia gave her and puts it on the model. With a pair of jewelry pliers, she very carefully sets it on the front porch of the Maitland home. We look at it now. It's a miniature version of Delia's water clock. So Adam and Barbara come out of the front door. This is what I don't like about the ending. They come out the front door, they stare at the water clock, and they look up at Kathy. So they're not going to use it, but they appreciate the surprise. In a twist of irony, even though they don't want to use it, the water clock falls over and breaks a window or something. So again, just the more things change, the more they stay the same. Adam finishes with, I know it's just a model house, and I know we're ghosts, and we're never going anywhere else for 132 years, but I still think it's heaven. He closes the door. Yeah, here's where the clock smashes the window. And Barbara says, well, it'll have to do until something else comes along. That's the end. If they were exorcised, I don't understand how they're in the model. Unless the model is the afterlife. I don't... That part of it does not make sense to me. And I can see why they rewrote... I can see why they rewrote it. I really did miss the bureaucracy of the waiting room. There's a lot of that stuff. So like a lot of the ironic, cynical humor of the film that was pointed at the Maitlands and it was really harsh on like the New York yuppies, that was tamed down and it was translated to the bureaucracy of the afterlife. So I get that. They wanted to incorporate that. That made the film much funnier. It turned it from a black comedy into a more of a comedy with black comedy elements, right? Yeah, I don't dig the whole Barbara and Adam still being around if they were exorcised. Because if they were exorcised, then why were they still there in some form? And does that mean it sounds like they're stuck there, like they can't come back and interact with the real world, which that negates the whole process and the happy ending of them having the kid. Because she's still there, but you can talk to her. You can't interact with her if you're the size of a cigarette lighter. So, I don't know. Like, to me, I really liked the darker tone because I'm more of a gallows humor type of person. And I think it had more horror aspects. Not that it was a horror movie, but, and I know this is horror reanimated, and some of you might say, oh, this isn't horror, it's Beetlejuice. shut the fuck up. Listen to one of the other episodes or stick around for another one next week. I still kind of consider this in the same realm. It's spooky shit, and I like spooky shit. So, and again, with this being a little bit darker, it was something that I thought kind of fit. The one thing I did want to mention, it's Pride Month, I believe, or June was Pride Month. We're ending, I think I record this on the 1st and 2nd of July. Pride Month has just ended. This film was written by Michael McDowell, who was gay. He died in 1995 of complications from AIDS. And in the 80s, go back and watch horror history, The Gayest Nightmare. The gay characters in horror movies, or in movies in general, Hollywood, television, they were not depicted in the most flattering of manners. And as I mentioned in the script, Michael himself describes Otho as very effeminate and in a not so unflattering way. This film, and I'd have to go back and check my records because this kind of occurred to me after I'd made my notes at like 3 a.m. last night, finishing everything up, finishing touches. This may be one of the first instances of an openly gay character in a film really taking almost a hero's role. So if you think of the finished film, and this is speculation. I'm not saying that I know this for sure, and I'm not accusing anyone of this, but the way Otho was changed in the end of the film, in the finished film, and the way he's just kind of brushed off and he goes away, it really, it reeks of him being dumbed down a bit for mass consumption. Because in this script, Otho is essentially the one who saves the family. Yeah, Adam and Barbara make the sacrifice, but Otho's the one who's the paranormal expert. He's the one that finds the manual, finds the spot about the exorcism, and instead of doing it as a cynical parlor trick, as in the finished movie, he does it to save the family, to save everyone at the party. Otho is everyone, all of their friends, their entire social network that was at this party, Lydia's friends from New York, everyone owes their life and their existence to Otho. And I don't really know of a film, and again, this was written in 84 or 85, I don't know of a film, a mainstream commercial film, that really positioned a gay character, an obviously gay and effeminately gay character, flamboyant I should say, not effeminate, but positioned someone like that as essentially the hero of the film, riding in like the cowboy with the shotgun. I don't think, now mentioning a gay cowboy and assless chaps riding in with a shotgun, Christ almighty, it's late, everybody. Hopefully you're used to my humor by now. My late night humor where my brain kind of skips a beat. But I'm being serious here as I'm making a joke. I want to take it back to being serious. This might be a trend-setting movie or screenplay, because I'm sure there was others, pitched and projected, but this movie is one of the most beloved black comedies of all time. It's an iconic film. It was wildly successful when it first came out. And it's a film that, 32 years later, I'm 33, 32 years later, the film is still shown several times every year on Halloween marathons. So, again, I understand why they condensed some things. I kind of wish they wouldn't have in that aspect of Otho. Because Otho came off as a dick. He's, supplying Delia with pills and he's all this stuff. But in the end, he becomes a hero. And at the end of the finished Beetlejuice film, Otho is the only main character, or even supporting character, that really doesn't have a redemption. Adam and Barbara help the family. Lydia decides not to commit suicide and jump off the Winter River Bridge. Delia and Charles come together and they're parents for once, and they try to protect their family, even though they don't really do anything. They show that they can live in the epilogue. They show that they can live side by side with the Maitlands, and they're kind of changing their tune a little bit, mellowing out. They're being redeemed in some way. Whereas Otho just never shows his face again. He's scared away because of the tacky clothing Beetlejuice dresses him in, and he's gone. To me, that was the big thing that stood out. Obviously, there's the difference of Beetlejuice, the Michael Keaton version, the more charismatic version, the carnival barker, the game show host Beetlejuice. That obviously made the film. And I think even if you had a more mundane Beetlejuice, if it was still done and the changes were made with the afterlife bureaucracy and the waiting room and all that stuff, I still think the film would have been good and successful. But that decision right there really made that film what it was. I don't think this version of the film would have been as successful or as well liked, as well accepted, and I don't think it would still be played to this day, and I guess be loved the way it is. It'd probably still be aired, but it'd probably be one of a million other movies that populate Hollywood that are not as fondly remembered. So there's some things I really liked. There were some things I didn't like. The ending to me doesn't make sense, but then again, it's a surreal movie, and we're talking about, ghosts and the models. That's the one thing that messed with my head a little bit, was the surrealism of the house. It's the end of space. It's the end of time. I wish they would have done more with the mirrors, but again, there's only so much you can do in a 90-minute movie or whatever it was. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you do, let me know. bshowbrian@gmail.com, bshowbrian on Twitter and Instagram, or Wrestling Reanimated. I'm sorry, Wrestling. I'm getting ready to do the next show, even though it's already 1 a.m. Horror Reanimated on Facebook. So hopefully you like this. I plan on doing more of these. It was a lot of work to do. But, I'll be honest. Not only is it a lot of work to read through a script and be conscious enough of the details, because I've read it twice or 3 times now, but to read through it and be conscious enough to make your notes and to formulate your opinions, and then coming up with a way to present this episode was probably the hardest episode I've ever done. Because I'm trying to teeter the line of just doing a live read and, just summarizing everything. And hopefully I read enough of the script to paint the mental picture without being too boring. So give me your feedback. Let me know what you think. I want to fine tune the process, because I do want to do some more of these, but I'll probably only do a couple of these a year, maybe 5 or 6 at the most, because it really was a lot of work. But I love doing this. This is really fun. I hope you guys enjoyed this, because as much as I love doing it, I love presenting things in a different fashion. And I know for you to listen to a podcast while you're working or lounging around the house or in the pool or just hanging out in your continued quarantine, in some cases, it's much easier for you to listen to someone talking about and describing a movie or script, as opposed to you sitting down and actually reading it and having the time to process it. So my name's Brian J. Thank you very much for checking us out. Wherever you listen to the podcast, please do me a favor. If you like us, subscribe, rate us, so that, iTunes or Google Play or whoever gets the information and takes a second look at us. And if you really like us, we're not doing donations and we're not really advertising at this point. Eventually I'll do a Patreon when the following grows, and maybe I'll do script reads as Patreon exclusives way down the road, if we're even blessed with the ability to do a paywall type of thing, because it is a lot of work. But I'm not asking for donations or money or anything at this point. Just trying to grow the podcast and grow awareness of it. So if you have a friend that would enjoy what we do with the what ifs and the fantasy scenarios, the crossovers, the scripts that were never made, just share it with them. Share it on social media, or have someone download the podcast, or send them the MP3 and have them listen to it, even if it doesn't count for our ratings, and just, turn them on to us, because I'd really appreciate that. That's what would help me the most with this podcast. But again, I'm Brian J. Thank you for taking the time. I know we went 2 hours, which we don't usually do, but this is really fun, and we'll do it again sometime. We will see you next week, and until then, enjoy the 4th. And if you're international, then just do whatever you do. Peace.